because I stay in touch with the kids that I taught in my very first job at Cocoa Beach Junior Senior High School, where I taught middle school and high school. And I was telling my kids at Stoneman Douglas how I feel like I've, in some regard, shortchanged the kids that I first taught, because I know so much more now than I did back then.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the great fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I really appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now, my next guest, Alex Kaminsky. Hi, Alex.
Hey, Mark.
Thanks for joining me this morning.
My pleasure.
We kind of put this together very quickly. I appreciate your time.
Sure, not a problem.
So, Alex, can you do me a favor and introduce yourself for my listeners?
Sure. I'm Alex Kaminsky. I'm currently the newly appointed director of bands at VanderCook College of Music in Chicago.
So, Alex, can you tell the listeners a little bit about your musical background, how you got your musical start, and we'll get into your story?
Sure. Well, I'm a clarinet player, and I started playing when I was in 7th grade. I was born and raised in Miami, Florida. And I remember being in elementary school, and the junior high school band gave a concert. We actually went over to the junior high, and that's all it took for me to get hooked on band. I think all of us at some point heard some performance of some band or some musician, and that was the hook that got us enticed into playing an instrument. And so I actually was going to play tenor sax. My mom is a big Miles Davis fan. She loves jazz. And so she said, you should play tenor saxophone. And the slots were filled. And so the band director said, well, how about clarinet? That's related to saxophone. And so I rented my Yamaha plastic clarinet, and off I went. And, so basically I just played in junior high. At the time it was junior high, not middle school. So it was 7 through 9, and went on, continued in a great high school program and on into college.
So tell me about that junior high band you heard. Do you remember anything of what they played, or was it just that they played?
I can't remember specifically what they played in the concert, but it was how they sounded collectively. I was just very intrigued and impressed by the sound of all the instruments playing together and sounding good. And so that was sort of what initially attracted me to the band.
And so how about high school? So you were a clarinet player, and when did you know that you wanted to make this a profession?
Well, it was really early on. My junior high school band director really was my first inspiration. I mean, he was clearly committed to making sure we always strive for excellence, and he would challenge us with difficult music and new approaches to concerts. And so as I finished my time in junior high, my family moved to a different area of Miami in South Florida. And we were looking at buying a house, and my parents basically told me, what band do you want to be in?
Oh, wow.
And there were two really strong high school band programs that were adjacent schools. And so I picked, the one that I thought I wanted to be in, and it was a great fit. It was Miami Southridge Senior High School. The band director there was Melvin Baker, and he was a veteran teacher. And I actually remember my first day of band camp, sitting in the band room as a then 10th grader, and there was a lot of chatter, and we were all talking. I was sitting in one of the rows in the back, and then all of a sudden there was silence. I had seen the door to the band room. You can only see the top of the door because there was a big music cabinet that was obstructing the view of the rest of the door, and I could see the top of the door open. And then all of a sudden, all the talking ceased, and this man came up to the center of the room, and it was the band director. And I was in awe of the respect that he commanded. So that made an indelible impression on me right off the bat. And I thought right then, this is like serious business. And Mr. Baker actually had been a drum major at the University of Miami. And like I said, he was a veteran teacher. This was in his last, few years of teaching. But in addition to commanding respect, he really knew how to instill a deep sense of pride into every one of us. And so we played some great literature, and that basically solidified the fact that I wanted to do this for the rest of my life. Both my junior high and high school band directors were just outstanding, just great musicians and very influential. So, I had a great experience from day one.
So what was it about Mr. Baker that commanded such respect?
A lot of it was his personality. I mean, he just was very kind of to the point and succinct, but he also demanded the very best in us. And he also was a very animated conductor. I remember at state contest one year playing Mannin, Veen by Haydn Wood. It's an old piece. I don't know if a lot of people know it today, but I remember playing on that stage. It was at Gusman Hall at the University of Miami. And in the back end of the piece, there's this brass chorale. I was playing clarinet, and we had a ton of 16th notes, and everything was just gelling. And the better we played, the more animated he got. And there was just an excitement playing under him that made you want to play the best that you possibly could. I just remember always wanting to do my best for him. And a lot of it was just the connection between him and the musicians on the stage. There was just this synergy, and I always look forward to concerts and rehearsals, really, with Mr. Baker.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, right? We always look to try to bottle up this magic, but really, I think it's more we're a collection of all those experiences that we've had.
Yeah, actually, Bobby Adams, who was one of my mentors, he was at Stetson University for many years. He would say that we are the sum of all of our experiences, good and bad.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So is there anything that you learned in Mr. Baker's classroom that you still use today? Like, is there something you can put your finger on?
Well, it's funny. I've been talking to some of the graduate students at VanderCook, and, they're all band directors. And one of the things that we've discussed is the fact that many of us teach not necessarily how we were taught in those music ed classes in college, but we initially teach the way we were taught in high school. And so when I came out of college, one of the things that Mr. Baker would do, and it's funny, I still call him Mr. Baker, he would give us itineraries, and the report times would be like 4:47 or 5:53. I mean, that's how disciplined and meticulous he was about everything in the band program. And so I did the same thing when I started teaching. I was very detail oriented. And I think those were one of the attributes that I gained from him, is to dot every I and cross every T in everything, every aspect of the program.
So, Alex, let's talk a little bit about your early career, since we just kind of brought up those beginning years. What was your first job like? And were you alone as the sole band director, or were you an assistant somewhere?
Well, I've actually flown solo for all 30 years in Florida. You have to have a minimum of 300 students in most places in Florida before an assistant is even considered. And so, so that first job, is actually was a two-school situation. I taught 3 periods at a middle school, and then the high school to which that middle school fed was right next door. As I mentioned, Cocoa Beach Junior Senior High School, and I taught the band of 16 kids that I inherited. And then there was a eurythmics class, which is where, the handful of flag girls were. And so that was my first job for 6 years. And one of the things that I appreciate about that experience is I had to start beginners. And I've talked to college kids, a lot of times they want to start teaching high school right off the bat. And I think every graduate should start by teaching middle school. I think I have tremendous respect for middle school band directors because, you start by having them open the case and put the instrument together. And that first year of teaching is so critical to the success of the musician for their entire playing career, really, because if you get started off incorrectly, that's going to haunt you for a long time. And so that was a great experience as far as learning. And then, opportunities opened up as I built that program. Like I said, we started with 16 kids in the high school band. I had 3 kids in the beginning band to start at the middle school. I went around to the 6th grade reading classes with my clarinet and a euphonium. I actually marched baritone in the University of Florida marching band my last 2 years. And so I sort of demonstrated those 2 instruments, and I said, hey, if you want to come and learn an instrument, come be in beginning band. And so that first year, we ended up with 25 beginners. And then it grew from there. By the 4th year or so, we were around 80 kids, and the bands were all doing really well, the middle school and the high school bands.
So you mentioned that you went to the University of Florida, and so do you want to talk a little bit about the experience? Were you in the marching band there? And
yeah, at the University of Florida, I went directly there after I graduated high school, and was there for 4 years. And honestly, I actually had a choice of a couple of schools. The program at Florida was a little bit smaller and afforded me the opportunity to be taught by the professors there. And that appealed to me. Sometimes when you go to a larger institution, a lot of the undergrads are taught by graduate students, which, that's okay. But, I kind of really wanted to deal more with the seasoned, veteran teachers and be taught by them. So at UF, that was the case. And also I had some great playing opportunities because it was a smaller situation. It wasn't small, but it was smaller. And so I got to play in, the symphony orchestra right off the bat, woodwind quintet. I was in the top band, and just was exposed to a lot of great literature, both on the wind ensemble and the orchestral side, that has served me well to this day.
Yeah, and so I also see that you have a degree from Indiana in education.
Yeah, when I finished my 4 years of undergrad, I decided to go ahead and get my master's right away. The advice that most people give is to teach for a couple of years and then maybe go back and get your master's, which I think is good advice. But I didn't trust myself because I loved teaching. And I kind of felt that if I started teaching, I would not want to leave to do anything. And so that's why I decided to go straight to graduate school. And again, I applied to several graduate schools and was very attracted to the comprehensive nature of the IU program. Everything there is fantastic. And, they have the opera and, 5 orchestras and, et cetera. And so I went straight to Bloomington. And that was a phenomenal experience. That place oozes with music when you walk down the hall. I remember John Starker being in the elevator with me, when I was, going to a lesson. And of course, Ray Kramer was my mentor there. And he remains a close friend to this day, he and Molly. it was just a great experience.
So, okay. So now you have been a high school band director for 30 years before this year. And so as I look at your biography, it says you've performed at the Midwest Clinic 4 times. Mm-hmm. And so obviously you have, now how many schools have you been teaching at?
I taught at 5 high schools.
5 high schools. And so the years for Midwest, 2005, 2009, 2014, 2018, this must span several different schools.
Right. Actually, it was 3 different schools. In fact, I remember that my first experience at the Midwest Clinic was in 1995, right when I was about to transition to my second school. I was going from Cocoa Beach to a kind of a country town school in a place called Auburndale. But anyway, the middle school band director there had been attending the Midwest Clinic, and he said, "Why don't you come, with me?" So I did, and I was hooked. And I've gone to the Midwest Clinic every year since, except for in 2002 when my youngest son was born. And I remember listening to the bands and just being in awe and just thinking, wow, I want my band to sound like that. And 10 years later, in 2005, my band was on the stage. It was, amazing. That was when I was at Lincoln High School. And then when I went to Buchholz High School in Gainesville, which is about 10 minutes away from the University of Florida, that band was already at a solid level. So we went in 2009 and 2014. And then I went to Stoneman Douglas and just took them this past year, 2018.
You've taken 3 different bands of 4 years to Midwest. So obviously you have there's some excellence there, something that you're doing to create the ability to accomplish at this level. Do you have any thoughts about moving into a new program and bringing that excellence with you, and how to make those changes to improve, or maybe not even improve, but to build on what's already there?
I found that the key to really achieving the highest level of excellence with the bands where I taught was to teach the individual musicians in the band. Like for the first part of my career, I also taught private clarinet lessons, and I really enjoyed doing that. And I really approach the band rehearsal like a private lesson. And a lot of times I'll focus on one student, and it's sort of a masterclass type of atmosphere where I'll be fixing something with that particular musician, like say in the clarinet section. And then I'll ask the rest of the clarinets to do the same thing. But I'm very mindful of every individual, making sure that everybody is contributing at their best level. And I sort of learned that when I went to Japan in 2001. I visited several classrooms there with an American contingent, and listened to their National Concert Band Festival, which was like off the charts spectacular. The level of playing there. And their approach is to basically clone each other as far as like the trumpet sound, the horns. They all sound the same. So
now can we kind of run through what this might look like in a rehearsal? Because I'm thinking about maybe a student who perhaps isn't as engaged as the first chair player, or I'm trying to imagine a situation where this is going to be more difficult, and how would you deal with that?
Right. Well, I would say, like, for example, say we're working on a scale. I am a proponent of like just going right down the line, and just hearing where they are and kind of helping the students. And I'll stop periodically and just ask a trombone player, "So what did you hear?" Or if we're playing a phrase in the music, and I'll be working with the flutes, and then I'll ask the trumpet player, do you have a suggestion? Like, what did you like? What do you think we should try? And so I try to keep the entire ensemble engaged in that way. And they know that I'm going to ask them a question, and I may just have them listen specifically to an aspect of what they're doing. So I'll say, okay, Johnny is going to play these 2 measures on saxophone. Listen to the articulation and tell me what you hear. And immediately everybody's kind of zoned in on Johnny, and then we get some feedback. And what happens is the rehearsal then becomes a community event. It's sort of like we're all working together to help each other. And that's really the atmosphere that I've been able to develop in the ensembles that I teach, where it's not me telling them specifically what to do, but it's them telling each other. It's kind of a helping your brother and your sister type of thing. And the kids, once you develop that culture, the kids, get used to it, and that's what they expect. But I always probe the kids. I'm always asking questions. I try to avoid telling them things. I try to get them to come up with the ideas and suggestions. And a lot of times our students will come up with ideas that we didn't even think of, which is what I love about probing ensembles. It's, I'll ask a question and inevitably I'll hear some thoughts and just think, wow, that's better than what I was thinking,
You're going to be taking over some music ed classes at VanderCook. So if you could distill it, is there one piece of advice that you'd want new teachers to have?
Well, it kind of goes back to what I said is the approach of teaching the individual and being very consistent and persistent in what you ask of your students. The music ed classes that I'm teaching are actually called methods of teaching. And so I'm basically going to teach my students at VanderCook my approach to getting a band to reach the highest level of excellence with all the details that entails. And so, like I said, a lot of it has to do with being tenacious and just wanting a goal and achieving it and having the patience to do that in each rehearsal, because it can get tedious. But once you get the individual students to a certain level, they generally don't go back.
Right.
And so it sort of maintains where it is and continues to move up from there.
What advice would you give to a teacher who ends up in a situation, maybe they take a new job and maybe the feeder has been problematic, or maybe the program's been in decline, or I don't know. I'm just trying to paint a picture of a place where things are very uneven. And so you've got 9th through 12th graders of all different abilities, and you're trying to keep them all together without losing the top players, but yet bring up the bottom. Do you have any thoughts on that? That's a really sticky situation.
Right. Well, I mean, if I took my very first situation where I taught, where there were 3 beginners in the middle school band and so forth. I mean, that was kind of a situation like that. And what you want to do is try to get them to experience success at some level. And when the collective experiences success, it doesn't necessarily matter the level of what it is that you're doing, as long as it's successful. I mean, just ringing a chord, isn't a technical, issue, but it's something that when you hear that sound, you crave it. And so getting an F concert in tune, you're just doing some basic things because you don't want to lose the weaker players in the group. And so,
right.
You just have to encourage the upper players to be, patient and try to do things that they can all succeed at pretty quickly, and once they taste that success and that sound, then you kind of move to the next level.
How about recruiting? What do we do to recruit? What does that for you? Relationships
and building them. When I would visit my middle school feeders, which I love to do, I would try to learn students' names, hey, Sally, how's it going? Can't wait to have you in the band next year, and that sort of thing. And just really, try to develop a rapport with those students that you're trying to recruit, and let them know that there's a place for them. And, one of the things too, that sometimes is a misnomer for high school band programs is that there might be some sort of like hazing, or, the upperclassmen will shun the newbies and that sort of thing. And, I am completely opposed to that, and I tell them, listen, when you come in, you're going to be our little brother or little sister, and you're part of the family. And we're going to help you every step of the way, And so just try to be encouraging. But like I said, just show an interest in them as a person. And of course, if they're a really good player, just say, wow, that, you sound awesome on that euphonium. I can't wait to have you in my band, And again, it's kind of like teaching the ensemble, really connect with the individual, And I think when you do that, it just makes the experience more meaningful to the members of the ensemble and to those students, and they'll want to come and play for you.
So, Alex, you have been the band director at 5 high schools, and most recently at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. And most of my listeners recognize that name for the tragic events that happened there. And so I don't want to ask you about that day, but I want to ask you about what impact that had on your band and how music sort of played a role in maybe healing for your students, if it did at all. I mean, I'll let you kind of take that.
Right. Well, when the shooting took place, the band building is actually adjacent to that building where it took place. And after the event, I realized that I was thrust into probably the most important role of my teaching career. I mean, from that moment forward, I took the responsibility of providing comfort, strength, guidance for my students, as well as their parents. And shortly after the tragedy, it became apparent to me that music was going to be central to the healing process for all of us. And since my students resumed making music together, which was, I guess, a week after, the power of music had manifested itself in a way that I'd never seen. I mean, the kids were speaking through their music making like I'd never heard before. Whatever emotions they had, whether it was sadness or anger, the music basically took on new meaning. And, we were actually scheduled to perform at Carnegie Hall for the New York Wind Band Festival 3 weeks after that. And I was prepared to cancel the trip. And I talked to the parents, first, our band parent board, and basically put it out to the kids. And I just said, look, we don't have to go. You tell me what you want to do. And they basically said, we want to play. We want to go. And the bottom line is that they did not want evil to paralyze them. And so they were going to basically reply to violence. We used actually Bernstein's quote to reply to violence by making music more intensely, more beautifully, and more devotedly than ever before. So that's what they did. And, they were already playing at a pretty high level of excellence, but what was infused into their music, I mean, they had a point of reference now from which to draw emotion that they didn't have before, unfortunately, the way it came about. But it definitely gave them a reason to speak, as they, in their music making, honored those that we lost, and also tried to give hope, to those that listened. And they really, when you play in a band, it's a community event. And so I could see how they would support each other in their playing, like as they were working together and speaking as one voice in the band. It was really remarkable to witness.
So can you tell me a little bit more? I know I saw some social media things, but can you tell me a little bit more about the Carnegie Hall performance?
Yeah, that was the first performance after the tragedy. And, there was still quite a bit of national attention on us. And so, Carnegie Hall was packed when we performed. And I actually didn't feel that we were like really fully prepared for that concert, just because we'd lost so much rehearsal time. But it was there that the kids really demonstrated the power of music, and how they would be playing well above their heads, like beyond their years, in the way they communicated when they played. And so we actually opened that concert. The very first thing we played was Gavorkna, a Fanfare by Jack Stamp. And one of the reasons we started with that was to make a bold statement that we were going to be making music intensely. And that's a pretty intense fanfare. And then we closed that concert with the finale from Mahler's Third Symphony, the Jimmy Reynolds transcription. And there was so much emotion in that performance that like I started crying before it ended. And the place, I mean, there was just so much emotion there. It was almost like a yearning that they were playing with, and a yearning for goodness. And so that was a very emotional experience, and they felt something they'd never felt before when they played together. And that pretty much carried through until the day I retired from high school band directing with them.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. I mean, I've had some pretty emotional experiences as a musician, as we've all had, but certainly nothing that raw, and certainly nothing that young, that raw.
Right. Well, yeah, there's something sad that young people at that age have to experience tragedy the way they have.
Yeah, you lived the worst nightmare of all of us who are teachers.
Right.
So how about the results of that? I imagine those kids are going to probably stay pretty close-knit for the rest of their lives.
Oh, yeah. And, a lot of them are, now that I've left, and we had a really strong senior class. These last two senior classes actually were pretty strong. And, several of them are now Facebook friends of mine. And those will be experiences that there, and also the Midwest Clinic performance, which was like incredible on many levels. I'll never forget those experiences in performance, and neither will they.
What do we take from all of this as far as teachers? Is there anything we can take that you learned that maybe the rest of us, you had to learn in the worst way possible, that the rest of us can benefit from?
Well, I think music touches the soul profoundly as it's performed at the highest level. Like, music will touch you regardless, but the higher the level of excellence, the deeper I feel it reaches, because you really can hear what the composer intended. You hear the chords, the harmonic structures, and the real inspiration that the composer infused into his writing. So the more we can really make that come alive at a high level, I think that is important. And because we had already been doing that, the music became the instrument with which we worked to heal together. And we were experiencing music at a very high level. And that just basically put our minds there on the music making. Because when you're focused on music making, kind of the rest of the world and some of the bad things in the world sort of get a little minimized. They're not as big when you're focused on intense music making. And so what I would say is continue to try to make music at the highest level possible, because it ministers to the soul. And there may be a point in time that you're going to need that music making in the midst of a tragedy or something that happens. And it's good to have music as an avenue, but really good music making to be able to cope with the emotions that you're dealing with.
Yeah. As a composer, I use music all the time to express what I can't really say in words or get out in feelings, over the years.
Oh.
People don't know that what pieces have what meaning because I don't assign that to them, but I know.
Right. Well, I mean, music is an art. It's just like an artist can paint his or her emotion onto a canvas. A musician can play a piece expressing emotion. A musician's canvas is silence. So, playing music and writing music with specific inspiration is really a great form of therapy. And it helps relieve pain and reduces stress and anxiety. I mean, there's just a lot of good that comes from the gift of music.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you being willing to share that experience with the listeners, because that's
Sure.
something that, obviously is difficult.
Well, and I think it's important because we all at some point will deal with some sort of tragedy. And it's important to know that music can play a significant role in the healing process.
I notice as I look at your bio, and just to kind of lighten the conversation up a little bit, that we've been talking about your concert bands. We've been talking about you going to the Midwest Clinic and Midwest and everything at Carnegie Hall. And as I look at the list of concert band achievements, I also notice that you have a huge number of marching band achievements.
Right.
How did you find the balance? Because now I don't do marching band. I never really have. My listeners know that. How did you find balance in your program to be able to keep those both well balanced so that you were doing sort of excellence at both aspects?
Well, the hub of all of my band programs has always been the concert band. I mean, that's basically where you teach your students how to play and musicianship skills, etc. But high school band is a complete experience, which includes the marching band. And everything emanates from the concert band. And then we have these satellite programs, which are the marching band, the jazz band, solo and ensemble, which is super important. And so it's a matter of applying all the concepts that you teach in the concert setting in the marching band. And I always encourage my students to sound like a wind symphony on the field. I said, if I close my eyes, I would want to imagine that you guys are sitting in chairs, playing your instrument. And there are some really good models in the drum corps world right now. Like, I'm a Carolina Crown fan just because their concept of tone quality and tone production is so spot on. And I also enjoy, some of the literature that they play on the field. And so really you treat the marching band sort of as an extension of the concert band, and do it with, when I say balance, I mean, don't be out every weekend doing marching competitions. And so it's a matter of doing it with, let's see, well, just doing enough to engage the students, but not doing so much that you burn them out, and approach everything that you do on the field with the same level of detail that you do in the concert hall. So, I mean, we were very meticulous about the visual aspect of our program, and of course the music, which is the it of the marching band, or should be. And so, yeah, it's just a matter of applying that same level of excellence to outdoors, and good things happen.
Yeah, no, and I think we see that with the very best marching bands often correlate with the very best concert bands. But I know that it's a balance that can be tricky to achieve.
Right. I think the danger is to just put too much focus on the marching side of the program. Everything has to be in balance, and we always have to remember that the concert band is the hub, and that should be the focus.
Okay, Alex, we should probably get into my final questions here. What I would call a lightning round if it didn't take 25 minutes to get through.
Right.
And so, Alex, there's a list of questions that I sent you at the end that I ask in every interview. The first of those is, where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
Good question. Well, like anything else, no extreme is good. There needs to be balance, but also perspective. I mean, whether we like it or not, competition is part of life. You compete to get a job. You try to get a high SAT score. You compete in auditions for officer positions. When competing in music, and marching band is primarily where we see competition in band programs, the approach needs to be that of focusing on ourselves, being the best we can be, and not beating so-and-so across town. In fact, in Florida, over the last 5 years, for example, 2 bands basically went back and forth for the state marching band championship, and it was Stoneman Douglas and Park Vista. We happened to be in neighboring counties just 20 minutes apart, and we took turns winning captions at regional competitions, and they won the state championship a couple of times. We won a couple of times, but our respect for each other, striving for excellence, superseded the competitive aspect of the activity. We kind of kept each other on our toes, just like a challenge system, I guess, does within a band. It's, I guess, what I call healthy competition, where we encourage each other to be our best, and we kind of get an idea of where we stand in the midst of a lot of great programs. So it gives us goals to improve upon, and the process of it all makes us better. And, if we happen to win, that's just icing on the cake, but it's not the cake. The cake is everything that leads up to and through the performance. That being said, a little bit of competition goes a long way. So we have to be aware of overdoing it and burning kids and band directors out. It's all about balance and perspective.
So speaking of balance and perspective and burnout, how do you find work-life balance in your career?
No, as a band director, that's tough. I had the advantage of having both of my boys in my band programs. And my wife, who's also a musician, she's a horn player, she was right there with us, and she would help with show design. She sewed flags. She would even help me pick music for performances. So it was a family affair for us. And so that made it a little bit easier for me. Really, there are seasons, and sometimes we're going to have to put in those long hours. But then there are less busy seasons. And what I would advise is to take advantage of the less busy seasons as much as possible, and spend that quality time with the family, get away and so forth. Just take advantage of when it's not as busy. And I did my best to try to leave work at school, if at all possible. And, just take advantage of those windows of time. And if you don't have windows of time, then you need to cut somewhere or delegate, because you need breathing room at some point. Otherwise, you will get burned out.
And so, Alex, this is a big question, and you can answer it in any way that you feel is appropriate. But what do you think are the challenges facing music education, and how can we best meet them?
Well, I think having to wear different hats and the demands that are placed on teachers in general are challenges that are facing all teachers. Of course, because of so many mandates from the district and state levels, funding for music programs always seems to be threatened, because they have to fund all of these mandates that they, place on teachers and administrators. And, unfortunately, many of these mandates end up going by the wayside because they don't work. I think one of the biggest challenges is to get decision makers who are not music people to understand the importance of music in the lives of children. I've seen the power of music to heal in my own students, and can't imagine having gone through what we went through without the ability to create music together. The language of music just transcends every other mode of human communication, not to mention how it enhances brain activity and the benefits to the overall academic achievement of the student. And we've seen that there's more and more research coming out that's really bringing this to light in a big way. So, in any case, just making music because of how music touches our soul is, in my opinion, the number one reason that decision makers need to keep music alive and strong in America's schools. But just continuing to try to advocate and communicate the importance of music in the lives of our kids, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face.
Okay, Alex, if I could give you a time machine and you could set it to the day of your high school graduation, what advice would you give yourself?
Well, honestly, it would have been at the beginning of my senior year in high school. My advice is don't let senioritis get the best of you. That would be my advice. I mean, my grades plummeted my senior year to the point that I actually had to retake a class in summer school to be able to enter the university. And in this day and age, I could never get away with that, as competitive as things are, with GPAs being like 4 point, whatever. So, keep your eye on the ball, and, which will allow those opportunities to be available to you. So just be careful not to get sidetracked. And as you go into college, the same thing. I mean, don't let the partying and those things sort of detour you from what you ultimately want to do with your life. So just keep your eye on the ball.
All right, Alex. So if you had a choice, what would be the final work for Wind Ensemble or band that you would want to conduct or perform or be a part of?
I love Percy Grainger, like Lincolnshire Posy is awesome. Holst. In fact, right now with the graduate band, I'm conducting the Holst First Suite. I mean, there's just some incredible masterworks. I mean, to narrow it down, really, Mahler is one of my favorite composers. In fact, Mahler 5 is at the top of my list as far as orchestral literature. And I've told my wife that I want the first movement played at my funeral. And it's just, pretty intense. So I'm thinking about how profound my band's performance of Mahler's Third Symphony, the finale, was at Carnegie Hall. And so I think that probably would be what I would maybe want to conduct as a swan song, I guess. That the finale to Mahler's Third Symphony. And, interestingly, talking about Mahler, the Second Symphony, which is the Resurrection Symphony, was performed by Bernstein right after President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And that's where he stated the quote, "This will be our reply to violence, to make music more intensely, more beautifully, more devotedly than ever before." So Mahler really is a profound composer, on many levels. So anyway, that's I think what I would want to conduct.
Alex, is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote?
Well, actually, next week, on Thursday, July 11th, I'm conducting the Wheaton Municipal Band. It's going to be at Memorial Park in Wheaton, Illinois. Concert starts at 7:30 p.m. The Wheaton Band is phenomenal. They played at Midwest a couple of years ago. And I'll be conducting a handful of pieces, a couple of pieces that were written for us, for Stoneman Douglas, one by Andrew David Perkins, and another one by Wayne O'Quinn. And then there will be some other, sort of uplifting pieces that we'll play. But I'm looking forward to that. I appreciate Bruce Moss for the invitation to conduct.
All right, Alex, how can people get in touch with you?
The best way is through email. My email address is akaminsky@vandercook.edu. So the first initial of my first name and then my last name, akaminsky@vandercook.edu.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Sure. My pleasure.